The day my parents told me they'd given my entire college fund to my brother, they thought they were destroying my future. What they didn't know was that I had access to a billion-dollar trust fund from my late grandmother, money they had no idea existed. By the time they realized what they'd done, I had already transferred the funds and disappeared, leaving them with nothing but the consequences of their favoritism. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Adrienne Caldwell, and I'm 21 years old. The story I'm about to tell you happened 3 years ago, but the shockwaves are still rippling through my family today. It's about betrayal, hidden wealth, and the most satisfying revenge I never planned to take. Let me take you back to that Tuesday evening in March, in our family's sprawling mansion in Willowbrook Heights, Connecticut. The dining room was filled with the usual tension that seemed to follow my family everywhere. Crystal glasses catching the light from the antique chandelier, my mother Penelope's perfectly manicured fingers drumming against the mahogany table, and my father Harrison clearing his throat in that way that meant he had something important to announce. I was home from Yale for spring break, excited to share the news that I'd been accepted into their prestigious medical program with a partial scholarship. I had worked myself to exhaustion, maintaining a 4.0 GPA while volunteering at the local hospital and conducting research that had already been published in 2 medical journals. At 19, I was already being courted by some of the most competitive residency programs in the country. My older brother Camden was also at dinner that night. 24 years old, charming in that effortless way that had always made him our parents' golden child, and currently unemployed after his 3rd startup had failed spectacularly. Camden had this gift for convincing people to invest in his ideas that sounded revolutionary until you realized they were just poorly executed versions of things that already existed. "Adrienne," my father began, cutting into his perfectly prepared salmon, "your mother and I have made a decision about your college fund." I felt a chill run down my spine. Something in his tone was wrong. Too casual, too dismissive. This was the fund that had been set up for me since birth, money that my parents had always told me was sacred, untouchable, specifically designated for my education. "We've decided to redirect those funds to Camden," my mother announced, not even looking up from her plate. "His new venture has incredible potential, and he needs capital to get it off the ground." The words hit me like a physical blow. "I'm sorry, what?" I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. "Camden's new app concept could revolutionize the food delivery industry," my father continued enthusiastically. "It's essentially a subscription service where users get mystery meals delivered based on their dietary preferences. Think of it as a surprise box for food lovers." I stared at them, waiting for the punchline. Camden's revolutionary idea was basically a meal kit service with a gambling element. Hardly the groundbreaking concept they were making it out to be. Meanwhile, I was 3 semesters away from completing pre-med and had already been accepted to one of the most competitive medical programs in the country. "But that's my college fund," I protested, my hands beginning to shake. "I need that money for medical school. The tuition alone is going to be over $200,000. "Adrienne, darling," my mother said with that condescending tone she'd perfected over the years, "surely you can find another way. Apply for more scholarships, take out loans. Smart girls like you always figure it out." "Smart girls like me?" I repeated, incredulous. "Mom, I've been on the dean's list every semester. I'm conducting research that's being published in medical journals. I've already been accepted to Yale Medical School." "And that's wonderful, sweetheart," my father said dismissively. "But Camden's opportunity is time-sensitive. The market window won't stay open forever." I looked at Camden, expecting him to say something, to show some sign of guilt, or at least acknowledgement of what was happening. Instead, he just smiled that charming smile that had gotten him out of trouble his entire life. "Thanks, Mom and Dad," he said, raising his wine glass. "I promise I won't let you down this time. This is going to be huge." This time. The phrase hung in the air like a toxic cloud. His previous ventures, a social media platform for pet owners and a subscription service for artisanal beard oils, had both failed within 18 months, losing investors hundreds of thousands of dollars. But somehow, our parents had convinced themselves that the third time would be the charm. "I can't believe you're doing this," I said, standing up from the table. "You're literally stealing my future to fund another one of Camden's failed experiments." "Don't be dramatic, Adrienne," my mother snapped. "And don't you dare call it stealing. This is our money, and we can allocate it however we see fit." "Your money?" I laughed bitterly. "You've been telling me my entire life that this fund was specifically for my education. I've made every decision based on that promise." "Plans change," my father said coldly. "Camden has demonstrated real entrepreneurial spirit. You're just going to be another doctor." Just another doctor. The words stung more than I expected. I had spent my entire life trying to earn their approval, working twice as hard as Camden for half the recognition. I had graduated valedictorian from Willowbrook Preparatory Academy, earned multiple academic scholarships, and was on track to become a surgeon. But apparently, none of that mattered as much as Camden's latest get-rich-quick scheme. "You know what?" I said, throwing my napkin down on the table. "Do whatever you want with that money. Give it all to Camden. I hope his mystery meal app makes you millions." I stormed out of the dining room and up to my childhood bedroom, my mind racing. I was furious, hurt, and completely betrayed. But underneath all of that anger, something else was brewing. A calm, calculating realization that would change everything. Because what my parents didn't know, what Camden didn't know, what nobody in my family knew, was that I had another source of funding. A source they'd all forgotten about because it had been set up so long ago, buried in legal documents they'd never bothered to read carefully. My grandmother, Evelyn Thornfield, had died when I was 8 years old. She'd been my father's mother, a brilliant woman who'd built a pharmaceutical empire from nothing in the 1960s and 70s. I barely remembered her, but I knew she'd been wealthy beyond anything my family could imagine. What I remembered was a conversation I'd had with her lawyer, Mr. Beaumont, at her funeral. He'd pulled me aside and told me something that, at 8 years old, I hadn't fully understood. Something about a trust fund that would become accessible to me when I turned 21. Something about grandmother Evelyn wanting to ensure that her legacy went to someone who would use it wisely. I'd forgotten about it completely until tonight. But sitting in my room, staring at the acceptance letter from Yale Medical School, I remembered Mr. Beaumont's words. "Your grandmother saw something special in you, young lady. She wanted to make sure you'd have everything you needed to change the world." I pulled out my laptop and started searching. It took me 3 hours, but I finally found Mr. Beaumont's contact information. By then, it was nearly midnight, but I didn't care. I needed to know if what I was remembering was real. The next morning, I would call Mr. Beaumont and discover that I was the sole beneficiary of a trust fund worth $1.2 billion. But that night, as I fell asleep listening to my parents in Camden celebrating downstairs, they had no idea that their worst nightmare was about to become my greatest triumph. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Let me tell you exactly who I was before that devastating dinner conversation, because it's important you understand what my parents were so casually throwing away. I wasn't just any college student. At 19, I was already being called a prodigy by my professors at Yale. My academic record was flawless. 4 years of straight A's, summa cum laude honors, and a research portfolio that most graduate students would envy. But more than that, I had spent my entire life preparing for a career in medicine with a singular focus that bordered on obsession. Since I was 12 years old, I knew I wanted to be a neurosurgeon, not because of some childhood trauma or inspiring movie, but because I was fascinated by the complexity of the human brain. While other kids my age were playing video games or gossiping about celebrities, I was reading medical journals and watching surgical procedures online. I taught myself anatomy using textbooks I ordered with my allowance money, and by 14 I could identify every bone, muscle, and organ in the human body. My dedication went far beyond just studying. Every summer since I was 15, I had volunteered at Mercy General Hospital in Hartford, starting as a basic volunteer and working my way up to assisting in patient care. The doctors there knew me by name and had watched me grow from an eager teenager into someone they genuinely respected. Dr. Richardson, the chief of neurosurgery, had even invited me to observe several of his operations, an honor typically reserved for medical students. During my junior year at Yale, I had published 2 research papers in peer-reviewed medical journals. The first was on innovative approaches to treating traumatic brain injuries, and the second focused on early detection methods for neurodegenerative diseases. Both papers had been cited by other researchers and had earned me recognition from the American Medical Association. At 19, I was already contributing to medical knowledge in ways that would advance patient care. The medical school acceptance from Yale wasn't just any acceptance. It came with a partial merit scholarship based on my research and academic performance. I had also been personally recruited by Dr. Whitmore, the director of Yale's neurosurgery program, who had told me that I had the potential to become one of the leading neurosurgeons of my generation. These weren't empty compliments from a guidance counselor. These were assessments from some of the most respected medical professionals in the country. But my achievements went beyond academics. I had spent 2 summers working with Doctors Without Borders on medical missions in Guatemala and Kenya, providing basic medical care in underserved communities. I spoke fluent Spanish and had learned enough Swahili to communicate with patients in rural Kenya. These experiences had shown me the global impact that medical expertise could have, and they had solidified my commitment to using my skills to help people who might otherwise go without care. The college fund that my parents had just handed over to Camden represented far more than tuition money. Medical school at Yale would cost approximately $380,000 over 4 years, including living expenses. After that, I would need to complete a neurosurgery residency, which would take another 7 years of intensive training with minimal income. The college fund was supposed to be the foundation that would allow me to pursue this path without drowning in debt. Without that financial security, my entire carefully planned future was in jeopardy. Yes, I could take out loans, but the debt would be crushing. I would graduate medical school owing close to $500,000, and during my residency years, when I'd be working 100-hour weeks for a salary of about $60,000 a year, I'd barely be able to make minimum payments on that debt. Many aspiring surgeons had been forced to abandon their specialization dreams because of financial pressures, settling for less demanding and more immediately lucrative fields of medicine. My parents knew all of this. They had been present at my high school graduation when I was named valedictorian. They had sat in the audience during the state science fair when I won first place for my project on neural pathway regeneration. They had the acceptance letter from Yale Medical School hanging on the refrigerator like a trophy, at least until yesterday. But somehow, none of my achievements mattered as much as Camden's latest business idea. Camden, who had barely graduated from Georgetown with a 2.8 GPA, Camden, who had never held a steady job for more than 18 months. Camden, whose first startup, a social media platform called Pet Connect, where pet owners could create dating profiles for their animals, had failed so spectacularly that it became a running joke in tech blogs. His second venture, Whiskerbox, a monthly subscription service for artisanal beard grooming products, had lasted 14 months before running out of funding. Now he wanted to create Meal Mystery, an app where users would pay a premium to receive random meals from local restaurants without knowing what they were ordering. The business model made no sense. Restaurants would hate the unpredictability, customers would complain about receiving food they didn't like, and the logistics of coordinating with multiple vendors would be a nightmare. But Camden had presented it to our parents with such confidence, such enthusiasm, that they had convinced themselves it was the next big thing. The worst part wasn't just that they were choosing Camden's questionable business venture over my medical career. It was the casual way they had dismissed everything I had accomplished. "You're just going to be another doctor," my father had said, as if the years I had spent preparing for this, the lives I hoped to save, the research I planned to conduct, were all trivial pursuits. I had worked harder than anyone I knew. I had sacrificed social relationships, missed parties, turned down invitations, and spent countless nights studying while my classmates were out having fun. I had done all of this because I believed in the promise my parents had made, that my education was secure, that my future was protected, that my dreams mattered to them. That night, lying in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by the trophies and certificates that apparently meant nothing to my family, I realized something important. This wasn't just about money. This was about respect, recognition, and the fundamental question of whether my parents actually believed in me or if they had just been going through the motions of supportive parenting while waiting for their real investment, Camden, to pay off. What they didn't know was that I was about to become financially independent in a way that would make their college fund look like pocket change. But more than that, I was about to discover just how little they actually knew about the daughter they had just betrayed. To truly understand the magnitude of my parents' betrayal, you need to understand how our family had always operated. The Caldwell household wasn't just biased toward Camden. It was an entire ecosystem designed to support his success while treating my achievements as background noise. Growing up, I had learned to navigate this carefully constructed hierarchy, where Camden's needs always came first, his failures were reframed as learning experiences, and his mediocre accomplishments were celebrated like Nobel Prize wins. Meanwhile, my straight A's were expected, my awards were nice but not surprising, and my ambitions were cute hobbies that I'd eventually outgrow. The pattern had been established early. When Camden was 8 and I was 5, we both showed interest in piano lessons. The family budget, according to my parents, could only accommodate one child's musical education. Camden got the lessons because, as my mother explained, boys have to work harder to develop artistic sensibilities. I was told I could learn to play by watching him practice. When Camden quit after 6 months because he found it boring, I wasn't offered the opportunity to take his place. Instead, my parents praised him for knowing his own mind and not wasting time on things that didn't suit him. This pattern repeated throughout our childhood and adolescence. Camden played varsity basketball in high school despite being mediocre at best. He spent most games on the bench. But our parents attended every single game, cheering loudly whenever he got playing time. They bought him expensive training equipment, hired a personal coach, and even considered moving to a different school district with a program so he could get more court time. Meanwhile, I was winning state-level academic competitions in mathematics and science. I represented Willowbrook Preparatory Academy at the National Science Olympiad 3 years running, placing in the top 10 nationally each time. But my parents attended exactly one of these competitions, and only because it happened to be held locally the same weekend as one of Camden's basketball tournaments was canceled. When Camden was suspended from school for cheating on his SATs, he had paid another student to take the test for him. My parents hired an expensive lawyer and spent months fighting the suspension. They argued that Camden was under too much pressure, that the college admissions process was unfair, and that he had made one small mistake that didn't define his character. The suspension was reduced to a warning, and Camden was allowed to retake the SATs under supervision. 6 months later, when I was falsely accused of plagiarism by a substitute teacher who didn't understand the citation format I had used for a research paper, my parents' response was to suggest that maybe I should be more careful about how I presented my work. They didn't hire a lawyer, didn't meet with the principal, didn't even request a conference with the teacher. I had to prove my innocence myself by providing drafts, research notes, and timestamps showing my original work. The false accusation was quietly dropped, but my parents never acknowledged the injustice or apologized for not supporting me. The financial disparities were even more glaring. Camden's basketball hobby required thousands of dollars in equipment, camp fees, and training costs. His first car was a brand new BMW, purchased because my father believed that successful young men need to project confidence. When Camden crashed that car 6 months later while texting and driving, it was replaced immediately with an even newer model. The insurance premiums alone cost more than most families spend on transportation in a year. My transportation needs were met with a 10-year-old Honda Civic that I was expected to share with whoever else in the family needed a car. When I saved up my own money from tutoring other students to buy a laptop for my college applications and research work, my parents praised my fiscal responsibility, but offered no financial assistance. Camden's gaming computer, which cost 3 times as much as my laptop, appeared in his room one day as a surprise gift for no particular occasion. The college application process had been the most revealing example of this favoritism. Camden's applications were a family project. My mother took time off work to help him write his essays. My father used his business connections to secure letters of recommendation from prominent alumni at Camden's target schools. They hired a private college counselor who cost $15,000 to optimize Camden's application strategy and help him highlight his unique qualities. My college applications were my responsibility alone. When I asked for help brainstorming essay topics, I was told that smart girls like you don't need help with writing. When I mentioned that I could benefit from the same college counselor they had hired for Camden, my father laughed and said, "You're already getting good grades. What more do you need?" The irony was that my applications were far superior to Camden's. I had genuine achievements to highlight, real passions to write about, and authentic stories of overcoming challenges and contributing to my community. Camden's essays were professionally polished descriptions of how playing bench basketball had taught him about teamwork, and how his failed business ideas showed his entrepreneurial spirit. Yet when our acceptances came in, Camden's admission to Georgetown was celebrated with a family dinner at the most expensive restaurant in Willowbrook Heights. My acceptance to Yale, with a partial scholarship no less, was acknowledged with a brief "congratulations" and a suggestion that I should probably start looking into student loans for the remaining costs. The most infuriating part was how this inequality was disguised as fairness. According to my parents, they weren't playing favorites. They were simply investing their resources where they could make the biggest impact. Camden needed more support because he was figuring himself out and learning to navigate challenges. I needed less support because I was naturally gifted and would succeed no matter what. This logic allowed them to justify giving Camden every advantage while treating my accomplishments as inevitable. When Camden barely graduated from Georgetown, it was a triumph over adversity. When I graduated summa cum laude from Yale, it was just what everyone expected. When Camden's business ventures failed, he was a brave entrepreneur who had dared to take risks. When I succeeded at anything, it was because I had unfair natural advantages that made success easy for me. The trust fund announcement was just the latest and most devastating example of this lifelong pattern. Camden's third failed business idea was being funded with my future, and this was being presented as prudent financial planning. My years of academic excellence, my medical school acceptance, my carefully planned career path, none of it mattered as much as giving Camden another chance to prove himself. What made it even worse was the casual way they discussed it, as if the decision was so obviously correct that explaining it was almost unnecessary. There was no acknowledgement that they were breaking a promise to me, no recognition that this decision would fundamentally alter my life plans, no consideration of the message they were sending about whose dreams mattered in our family. As I lay in bed that night, I realized that this moment was clarifying something I had been trying to ignore for years. My parents didn't just prefer Camden. They fundamentally didn't believe in me. Despite all evidence to the contrary, despite my achievements and potential, they saw me as the safe bet who would be fine no matter what, while Camden was the real investment opportunity who deserved their time, money, and attention. They had built their entire approach to parenting around the assumption that I would succeed despite their neglect, while Camden would only succeed because of their support. Tomorrow, I would discover just how wrong they were about both of their children, and just how little they actually knew about the resources available to me. The next morning, I woke up with a sick feeling in my stomach and a determination to fight for my future. I had spent half the night rehearsing what I would say, how I would present my case logically and calmly. I was armed with facts, figures, and compelling arguments about why funding my medical education was not just the right thing to do, but the smart financial decision for the family. I found my parents in my father's study, where they were going over some paperwork with Camden. The sight of them huddled together, planning what to do with my money, made my blood boil, but I forced myself to remain composed. I had learned over the years that emotional arguments never worked with Harrison and Penelope Caldwell. They dismissed passion as irrationality and tears as manipulation. "Mom, Dad, I'd like to discuss yesterday's decision," I said, standing in the doorway with what I hoped was professional composure. "I think there might be some factors you haven't fully considered." My father looked up from the papers with an expression of mild annoyance. "Adrienne, we've already made our decision. There's nothing to discuss." "But there is," I pressed on, stepping into the room. "I've run the numbers, and I think you'll find that investing in my medical education actually provides a much better return on investment than Camden's startup." Camden snorted. "Since when do you know anything about business, Adrienne?" I ignored him and pulled out the folder I had prepared. "A neurosurgeon's average annual salary is $750,000. Over a 30-year career, that's $22.5 million in earning potential. The cost of medical school is $380,000. That's a return of nearly 6,000% on your investment." "Adrienne," my mother said with that patronizing tone I knew so well, "this isn't about money." "It's not?" I asked. "Then what is it about?" "Because yesterday you told Camden that his business could make millions, so it certainly sounded like it was about money then." "Camden's venture has the potential for exponential growth," my father explained as if I were a child who couldn't understand basic concepts. "One successful exit could return hundreds of millions of dollars. Your medical career, while respectable, has a ceiling." I stared at him in disbelief. "A ceiling? Dad, I'm going to be saving lives. I'm going to be conducting research that could lead to breakthrough treatments for neurological diseases. How do you put a ceiling on that kind of impact?" "Don't be naive, sweetheart," my mother chimed in. "Doctors are well-paid employees. Entrepreneurs are wealth creators. There's a fundamental difference." "Entrepreneurs like Camden?" I asked, my composure beginning to crack. "The entrepreneur who has already lost investors nearly $500,000 on 2 failed ventures? That entrepreneur?" "Those weren't failures," Camden interjected defensively. "They were learning experiences. Every successful entrepreneur has setbacks. Learning experiences that cost other people hundreds of thousands of dollars," I shot back. "Meanwhile, I've actually generated value. My research has already been cited by other scientists. I've contributed to medical knowledge that will help patients for decades to come." "Research papers don't generate revenue," my father said dismissively. "Citations don't pay bills." I felt like I was arguing with people from another planet. "So you're telling me that Camden's failed app ideas are more valuable than published medical research?" "We're telling you that Camden has vision," my mother said firmly. "He thinks big. He's not content to just follow a predetermined path like everyone else." "A predetermined path?" I laughed bitterly. "You mean the path where I work 100-hour weeks for 7 years to become qualified to perform brain surgery? That predetermined path?" "Adrienne, you're being dramatic," my father said. "There are always alternatives. You could go to a state school for medical school. You could specialize in something less demanding than neurosurgery. You could even consider a different career entirely." I felt like he had slapped me. A different career? Dad, I've wanted to be a neurosurgeon since I was 12 years old. I've spent nearly a decade preparing for this. Everything I've done has been building toward this goal. And that's exactly the problem, Camden said with a smug smile. You've never taken any risks, Adrienne. You've just followed the safe, predictable path. Where's the innovation in that? Innovation? I was incredulous. You want to talk about innovation? I'm developing new approaches to treating traumatic brain injuries. I'm working on early detection methods for Alzheimer's disease. What's innovative about yet another food delivery app? Meal Mystery isn't just another food delivery app, Camden said, his voice rising. It's a completely new paradigm for how people experience dining. It's about surprise, adventure, breaking people out of their comfort zones. It's about charging people premium prices for food they might not even like, I countered. The business model makes no sense. Restaurants will hate the unpredictability, customers will complain about getting meals they don't want, and the logistics will be a nightmare. See, this is exactly what I'm talking about, my mother said, shaking her head. You always focus on the problems instead of the possibilities. Camden sees opportunities where others see obstacles. I turned to my father, hoping for some sign of rationality. Dad, you're a businessman. Look at this objectively. Camden has a track record of failure. His ideas sound good in theory but fall apart in practice. I have a track record of success. I've never failed at anything I've seriously committed to. And that's your problem, my father said. You've never been tested. You've never had to overcome real adversity. Camden has shown resilience, adaptability, the ability to bounce back from setbacks. Resilience? I could hardly believe what I was hearing. Dad, I worked 3 jobs in high school to save money for college expenses. I spent my summers doing medical volunteer work in developing countries. I've published research while maintaining a perfect GPA. How is that not resilience? Those are academic achievements, my mother said dismissively. The real world is different. Camden understands market dynamics, consumer psychology, the complexities of running a business. He understands how to spend other people's money on ideas that don't work, I said flatly. The room fell silent for a moment. I could see the anger building in my parents' faces, and I knew I had pushed too far. But I was beyond caring about their feelings. Adrienne, my father said in a dangerously quiet voice, I think you need to adjust your attitude. Camden is your brother, and he deserves your support, not your criticism. My support? I laughed. He's taking my college fund, and you want me to support him? We're reallocating family resources to maximize their impact, my mother corrected, and frankly, your jealousy is unbecoming. Jealousy? The word hit me like a physical blow. You think I'm jealous? Of what? His failures? His inability to hold a job? His complete lack of real-world achievements? I think you're jealous of his courage, Camden said with that infuriating smirk. His willingness to bet on himself instead of just following the crowd. Following the crowd? I was shouting now, all pretense of composure abandoned. Getting into Yale Medical School is following the crowd? Publishing medical research at 19 is following the crowd? Enough, my father said sharply. This conversation is over. Our decision is final. Camden needs this opportunity, and we're going to give it to him. And what about what I need? I asked desperately. You'll figure it out, my mother said with finality. You always do. You're resourceful. Camden needs more guidance, more support. I stood there for a moment, looking at the 3 of them. My parents, who had just told me that my decade of preparation and achievement meant less to them than Camden's latest fantasy. And Camden himself, who couldn't even pretend to feel guilty about destroying my carefully laid plans for his own benefit. You know what? I said quietly. You're absolutely right. I will figure it out. But don't expect me to be grateful for the lesson. I turned and walked out of the study, leaving them to their planning session. As I climbed the stairs to my room, I could hear Camden's voice floating up behind me. She'll get over it. Adrienne always lands on her feet. That phrase would echo in my mind for the rest of the day. Adrienne always lands on her feet. As if my successes were due to luck rather than effort. As if my resilience was something that just happened to me, rather than something I had developed through years of being overlooked and undervalued. They had no idea how right Camden was about me landing on my feet, but they were about to find out that when I landed, it would be from a height they couldn't even imagine. After the confrontation in my father's study, I spent the rest of the morning in my room trying to process what had just happened. The rational part of my brain kept telling me to start researching student loan options and scholarship opportunities, but something was nagging at me, a growing suspicion that the college fund might not be the only financial betrayal I was about to discover. Around noon, I decided to check my personal bank accounts. I had several accounts that I'd opened over the years for different purposes. My main checking account, a savings account for personal expenses, and a high-yield savings account where I'd been depositing money from my tutoring work and my summer job at the research lab. Altogether, these accounts contained about $45,000 that I had carefully saved over the past 4 years. When I logged into my online banking, my heart stopped. Every single account showed a balance of 0. I stared at the screen for a full minute, certain there had to be some kind of mistake. I refreshed the page, logged out, and back in. Even called the bank's customer service line to make sure their website wasn't experiencing technical difficulties. But the representative confirmed what I was seeing. All of my accounts had been emptied 3 days ago through authorized transfers. Authorized transfers. That phrase sent a chill down my spine. When I had opened these accounts as a minor, my parents had insisted on being listed as joint account holders for legal purposes. They had assured me that this was just a formality, that they would never access the accounts without my permission. The money was mine, they had said. They were just there to help me manage it responsibly. I pulled up the transaction history with trembling hands. There it was, in black and white. 3 separate transfers totaling $45,127, all authorized by Adrienne Caldwell, all going to the same destination account. An account I didn't recognize, but that was clearly connected to Camden's new business venture. They hadn't just taken my college fund, they had emptied every penny I had saved from 4 years of part-time work. The money I had earned tutoring struggling classmates in calculus and organic chemistry gone. The salary I had saved from my summer internship at the neurological research lab, where I had worked 60-hour weeks pipetting samples and organizing data, gone. The birthday money I had carefully deposited instead of spending, the payment I had received for helping a local professor edit his research papers, even the small amount I had earned from selling my old textbooks, all of it gone. I sat there staring at the 0 balances, and something inside me broke. This wasn't just financial theft. This was a violation of trust, so profound that it changed my fundamental understanding of who my parents were. They had looked me in the eye for years, listening to me talk about my savings goals, watching me make careful decisions about spending versus saving, praising my financial responsibility, all while planning to steal every penny when it suited their purposes. But it got worse. I remembered that I had opened a small investment account when I turned 18, using some of the money I had earned from my research work. It was only about $8,000, invested in a conservative portfolio that I had planned to use for medical school expenses. My parents weren't joint holders on this account. I had opened it independently through a different financial institution. I logged into that account with a mixture of hope and dread. The account existed, but it had been liquidated. All $8,000 had been withdrawn 2 days ago. But how was that possible? I was the only authorized user on that account. I called the investment firm immediately. After being transferred through several departments, I finally reached someone who could explain what had happened. Apparently, my parents had contacted the firm claiming that I was having a mental health crisis related to the stress of college and medical school applications. They had provided documentation, which I later learned was completely fabricated, suggesting that I was experiencing a breakdown and making irrational financial decisions. Based on this fraudulent information and because I was still listed as their dependent on their tax returns, the firm had allowed them to intervene and liquidate the account for my own protection. The money had been transferred to an account they claimed was being established for my medical care. Of course, no such medical account existed. The money had gone straight to Camden's business fund. I hung up the phone and immediately called my bank to report the fraud, but the customer service representative explained that because my parents were joint account holders on my other accounts, those transfers were technically legal. As for the investment account, the financial firm had acted in what they believed was my best interest based on the information provided by my parents. The representative suggested I might want to consult with a lawyer about my options, but even as she spoke, I realized how powerless I was. My parents had been careful. They had structured everything in ways that were technically legal, even if morally reprehensible. Proving fraud would require demonstrating that their claims about my mental health were false, which would be expensive and time-consuming resources I no longer had. Then I discovered the third betrayal. Going through my financial documents, I found a letter that had arrived the previous week that I hadn't opened yet. It was from the scholarship committee at Yale, and I had assumed it was just routine paperwork related to my partial scholarship. Instead, it was a notification that my scholarship had been revoked. According to the letter, the scholarship committee had received information suggesting that my family's financial situation had changed significantly, making me ineligible for need-based aid. Someone had contacted them to report that my family had recently come into substantial assets that had not been disclosed on my financial aid applications. The letter was dated 5 days ago, 2 days before my parents had announced they were giving my college fund to Camden. They had sabotaged my scholarship before they had even told me about their decision. I called the scholarship office immediately, demanding to know who had provided this information and what evidence they had of these supposed assets. The administrator I spoke with was sympathetic but firm. They had received what appeared to be legitimate documentation showing that my family had acquired significant new wealth. Based on their policies, they had no choice but to revoke the scholarship. When I asked to see this documentation, I was told that it had been submitted by Adrienne Caldwell, my father, as part of what he described as a, quote, good faith effort to update our financial information. The document showed that our family had recently acquired assets worth several $1 million. The assets were Camden's business projections. My father had submitted Camden's wildly optimistic revenue forecasts for Meal Mystery as if they were actual current assets, making it appear that our family had suddenly become wealthy enough that I no longer needed financial aid. Camden's fantasy numbers, projections showing his app generating millions in revenue within the first year, had been presented to Yale as established fact. The scholarship committee had no way of knowing that these projections were based on nothing more than Camden's imagination and my parents' blind faith. They saw documents showing millions in family assets and naturally concluded that I was no longer eligible for need-based aid. My father had destroyed my scholarship to justify giving my college fund to Camden. He had created a paper trail that made his decision look financially necessary. After all, if the family was suddenly wealthy enough that I didn't qualify for financial aid, why should I need a college fund? It was breathtakingly calculated. They hadn't just acted impulsively or made a poor decision in the heat of the moment. They had planned this. They had systematically dismantled every source of funding I had for medical school, all while creating documentation that would make their actions appear justified if anyone questioned them. As I sat in my room that afternoon, surrounded by bank statements showing zero balances and scholarship revocation letters, I realized that my parents hadn't just betrayed me. They had tried to destroy my future so completely that I would have no choice but to accept their narrative about what I should do with my life. Without the college fund, without my personal savings, without my scholarship, medical school was impossible. I would be forced to settle for a state school, a less demanding career, a smaller life, exactly what they had suggested that morning. Their theft wasn't just about giving Camden money. It was about forcing me into a position where I would have to be grateful for whatever scraps they chose to throw my way. but they had made one crucial miscalculation. As I sat there contemplating the wreckage of my financial life, I remembered something that had been buried in my memory for over a decade. A conversation with an elderly lawyer at my grandmother's funeral. A conversation about a trust fund that would become available to me when I turned 21. I had turned 21 3 months ago. For the first time in 2 days, I smiled. That evening, as my parents and Camden celebrated downstairs with champagne and excited chatter about Meal Mystery's launch strategy, I sat in my room staring at my grandmother's funeral program from 13 years ago. I had kept it all these years in a memory box, along with the few other mementos I had from Evelyn Thornfield, a woman I barely remembered, but who had apparently seen something in me that my own parents missed. The memory of that conversation with her lawyer, Mr. Beaumont, was frustratingly vague. I had been 8 years old, overwhelmed by grief and the formal atmosphere of the funeral. But I could still picture him, a tall, distinguished man with silver hair and kind eyes, who had knelt down to my level in the corner of the funeral home's reception area. "Your grandmother was very fond of you, young lady," he had said softly. "She told me you were going to do extraordinary things someday." I remembered feeling confused because I barely knew my grandmother. She had lived across the country in San Francisco, and we had only visited her a handful of times. But during those visits, she had always paid special attention to me. While Camden played video games or watched television, she would ask me about school, about what I was reading, about my dreams for the future. "She wanted to make sure you would have everything you needed to change the world," Mr. Beaumont had continued. "When you turn 21, I'll have something very important to discuss with you." At 8 years old, 21 had seemed impossibly far away. I had nodded solemnly and promptly forgotten about the conversation as my childhood moved forward. Now, 13 years later, with my entire future in ruins, those words came flooding back with crystal clarity. I spent the next hour searching online for any trace of Beaumont's law firm. It took considerable detective work, but I finally found a listing for Beaumont, Sterling & Associates in San Francisco, the same firm that had handled my grandmother's estate. According to their website, Edward Beaumont was now the senior partner, and the firm specialized in estate planning and trust management. My hands shook as I dialed the number. It was nearly 6 p.m. on the East Coast, which meant it was 3 p.m. in San Francisco, hopefully still within business hours. The receptionist who answered was professional but cautious when I explained that I was calling about my grandmother's estate. "I'm sorry, but Mr. Beaumont is in meetings for the rest of the day," she said. "However, I can schedule you for a call tomorrow morning if this is regarding the Thornfield Trust." The Thornfield Trust. Those words sent electricity through my entire body. "Yes," I managed to say. "Yes, this is regarding the Thornfield Trust. My name is Adrienne Caldwell, and I believe I'm a beneficiary." There was a pause, then the sound of typing. "Ms. Caldwell, I see your name here in our system. Mr. Beaumont has been expecting your call for quite some time. Can you hold for just a moment?" My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. After what felt like an eternity, a familiar voice came on the line. "Adrienne, my goodness, is it really you?" Mr. Beaumont's voice was exactly as I remembered it, warm, cultured, and unmistakably kind. "I was beginning to wonder if we would ever hear from you." "Mr. Beaumont, I'm sorry it took me so long to call. I honestly forgot about our conversation until today." He chuckled softly. "That's quite understandable. You were very young, and it was a difficult day for everyone. But your 21st birthday was 3 months ago, according to my records. Happy belated birthday, my dear." "Thank you," I whispered. "Mr. Beaumont, I need to ask you something, and I'm afraid to hear the answer. At my grandmother's funeral, you mentioned that she had set something aside for me. Is that real?" "Oh, it's very real," he said gently. "Adrienne, your grandmother established a substantial trust fund for you when you were born. She was quite specific about the terms. The funds would become available to you on your 21st birthday, with no restrictions on how you chose to use them. I closed my eyes, barely daring to breathe. How substantial. The trust is currently valued at approximately $1.2 billion. The phone slipped from my hand and clattered onto my desk. I stared at it in shock, then quickly picked it up again. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" $1.2 billion, Mr. Beaumont said patiently. "Your grandmother was an extraordinarily successful businesswoman, and she was very careful about how she invested and grew her wealth over the years. She wanted to ensure that her legacy would provide you with complete financial freedom to pursue whatever path you chose in life." I sat in stunned silence, trying to process what I was hearing. While my parents had been arguing about $200,000 and treating it like it was a life-changing amount of money, I had been sitting on a trust fund worth over $1 billion. "But why didn't my parents know about this?" I asked. "Surely something this significant would have been mentioned in her will." "Actually, the trust was deliberately structured to be separate from your grandmother's primary estate," Mr. Beaumont explained. "She established it through a private trust document that was never made public. Your father received his inheritance from her main estate, which was substantial, though nowhere near the amount of your trust. But he was never informed about the separate provision she made for you. She kept it secret from him. Intentionally so. Your grandmother had some concerns about your family dynamics. She wanted to ensure that this gift would be yours alone, without any possibility of family pressure or interference. Even from beyond the grave, my grandmother had understood my family better than I did. During your last visit with her, when you were 7, she spent considerable time talking with you," Mr. Beaumont continued. "She told me afterward that she could see your potential, your intelligence, your determination. She also mentioned that she was worried about how your parents seemed to favor your brother over you." Tears started streaming down my face. A woman I barely remembered had seen me more clearly than the people who raised me. "What happens now?" I asked. "Well, that's entirely up to you. The trust is yours to access whenever you're ready. We can arrange for immediate liquidity if needed, or we can discuss various investment and disbursement strategies. Your grandmother also included a personal letter for you, which I've been instructed to deliver when you claimed the trust." "A letter?" "Yes. She wrote it shortly before her death, specifically for you to read when you came of age. Would you like me to overnight it to you, or would you prefer to visit our offices to receive it in person?" I thought about my current situation, trapped in a house with people who had systematically destroyed every source of funding for my future, listening to them celebrate their betrayal downstairs. The idea of staying here even one more day felt unbearable. "Actually, could I fly out tomorrow? I'd like to handle this in person." "Of course. I'll have my assistant arrange everything. We'll also prepare all the necessary documentation for you to access the trust immediately, if that's what you decide to do." After we ended the call, I sat in my room for a long time, listening to the sounds of celebration from downstairs. My family was toasting to Camden's bright future, funded by money they had stolen from me. They had no idea that while they were squabbling over a few $100,000, I had just gained access to wealth beyond their wildest imagination. But more than the money, what struck me was my grandmother's incredible foresight. She had seen who I could become and who my family really were, and she had taken steps to protect me from them long before I even understood I needed protection. The next morning, I told my parents I was returning to Yale early to prepare for final exams. They barely looked up from their breakfast planning session with Camden about his app launch timeline. As I packed my suitcase, including all of my important documents and personal items, I realized I was packing everything that mattered to me. I wouldn't be coming back to this house as the same person. "Have a good semester, honey," my mother called absently as I headed for the door. "Study hard." "Oh, I will," I replied with a smile she couldn't see. "I'm going to learn quite a lot." As my taxi pulled away from the house where I had spent 21 years being undervalued and overlooked, I felt something I had never experienced before: complete and total freedom. My parents thought they had cornered me, forced me into dependence, made me grateful for whatever scraps they chose to throw my way. Instead, they had given me the final push I needed to claim a power they never knew existed. By this time tomorrow, I would be one of the wealthiest people in the country, and my family would still be arguing about how to split up the money they had stolen from their daughter, money that would soon seem laughable compared to what I actually possessed. The irony was perfect. They had betrayed me to secure Camden's future, never realizing they had just handed me the resources to make their betrayal utterly meaningless. The flight to San Francisco gave me 6 hours to process what was happening to my life. As the plane climbed above the clouds, I felt like I was literally rising above the petty world my family had created, where they fought over scraps while I was about to inherit an empire. But the person who truly understood the magnitude of this moment wasn't waiting for me in San Francisco. She was sitting beside me in seat 14B. Dr. Rebecca Hastings had been my academic mentor at Yale for the past 2 years. She was a brilliant neuroscientist who had taken me under her wing after reading my first research paper, and over time, she had become more than just a professor. She had become the mother figure I had never really had. When I called her in tears the night before, explaining that I needed to fly to San Francisco for a family emergency, she had immediately booked herself on the same flight. "You sounded like you were drowning on that phone call," she had said when she met me at JFK Airport. "Whatever's happening, you don't have to face it alone." Dr. Hastings was everything my mother wasn't. Where Penelope Caldwell was cold and calculating, Rebecca was warm and intuitive. Where my mother dismissed my achievements, Rebecca celebrated them. Where my mother saw my ambitions as unrealistic, Rebecca saw them as inevitable. As we flew west, I found myself telling her everything, not just about the trust fund, but about years of feeling invisible in my own family. About Camden's failures being reframed as learning experiences while my successes were treated as ordinary. About my parents stealing my money and sabotaging my scholarship. About the systematic way they had tried to destroy my future to fund my brother's fantasies. "Adrienne," Dr. Hastings said softly when I finished, "what your parents did isn't just wrong, it's financial abuse. And the psychological manipulation they've subjected you to your entire life is unconscionable." Hearing her say those words, financial abuse, psychological manipulation, gave me vocabulary for things I had never been able to name. In my family, these behaviors had been normalized, presented as tough love or smart resource allocation. But Dr. Hastings, looking at the situation with clear eyes, could see it for what it really was. "The trust fund changes everything," she continued, "but I want you to be prepared for what comes next. When people discover you have this kind of wealth, especially family members who have been controlling your resources, they're going to react in ways that might surprise you." "What do you mean?" "Your parents and your brother are going to try to manipulate you into sharing this inheritance with them. They'll claim they were always supportive, that you owe them for raising you, that families should stick together. They'll rewrite history to make themselves look like loving parents who deserve to benefit from your good fortune." I thought about this as we descended into San Francisco. The idea of my parents trying to claim they deserved any part of grandmother's gift to me was so outrageous that it was almost funny. But Dr. Hastings was right. They would probably try exactly that. Mr. Beaumont met us at his law office in the heart of San Francisco's financial district. The building was old and elegant, with marble floors and wood-paneled walls that spoke of generations of serious wealth management. His office on the 32nd floor offered stunning views of the bay, and I couldn't help but think that this was the world my grandmother had inhabited, a world of quiet power and substantial resources. Mr. Beaumont looked exactly as I remembered him, just with more silver in his hair and deeper lines around his kind eyes. He greeted me with a warm hug and shook hands respectfully with Dr. Hastings when I introduced her as my mentor and trusted advisor. "Before we discuss the financial details," he said, settling behind his massive desk, "I think you should read your grandmother's letter. She wrote it specifically for this moment." He handed me an envelope with my name written in elegant script across the front. Inside was a letter written on cream-colored paper in my grandmother's careful handwriting. My dearest Adrienne, it began, and I could almost hear her voice in the words. If you are reading this letter, it means you have reached your 21st birthday and discovered the gift I left for you. I hope it comes at a time when you need it most, because I suspect your family may not have been as supportive of your dreams as they should have been. I want you to know that even though we didn't spend much time together, I saw something extraordinary in you from the time you were very small. During our visits, while your brother was content to be entertained by screens and games, you asked questions about everything. You wanted to understand how things worked, why people made the choices they did, what you could do to make the world better. I also noticed how differently your parents treated you and your brother. I watched them praise Camden for mediocre efforts, while taking your exceptional achievements for granted. I saw them invest time and attention in his interests, while dismissing yours. It broke my heart, but it also made me determined to ensure that their short-sightedness wouldn't limit your potential. The money I'm leaving you represents a lifetime of work building and growing my pharmaceutical company. I want you to use it not just for your education and comfort, but as a tool to change the world in ways that only you can envision. You have a brilliant mind and a compassionate heart, a rare combination that gives you the potential to make extraordinary contributions to humanity. I've structured this trust to be completely independent from my main estate because I wanted to ensure that your parents could never interfere with your inheritance or pressure you to share it in ways that didn't align with your values. This money is yours alone, to use as you see fit. But more than the financial freedom, I hope this gift gives you something even more valuable: the knowledge that someone believed in you completely. Someone saw your worth even when the people closest to you failed to recognize it. You don't owe anyone access to this inheritance. You don't owe anyone explanations for how you choose to use it. And you certainly don't owe anyone gratitude for the years they failed to see your value. Make your own family, Adrienne. Surround yourself with people who celebrate your successes rather than diminishing them. Build a life that reflects your values, not the limitations others try to place on you. I love you, and I'm proud of the woman I know you'll become. Your grandmother, Evelyn Thornfield. By the time I finished reading, tears were streaming down my face. Dr. Hastings had moved closer and was rubbing my shoulder comfortingly. Even Mr. Beaumont had tears in his eyes. She really saw me, I whispered. She saw everything. She did indeed, Mr. Beaumont said softly. And she wanted to make sure you would have every resource you needed to become the person she knew you could be. We spent the next 2 hours going over the details of the trust. The money was invested in a diversified portfolio that had grown substantially since my grandmother's death. I could access it immediately, in whatever amounts I chose, for any purpose I deemed appropriate. There were no restrictions, no requirements to justify my spending, no obligations to share with family members. What I recommend, Mr. Beaumont said, is that we transfer an initial amount to accounts under your sole control, and then work out a longer-term strategy for managing the rest. How much would you like immediate access to? I thought about my parents' theft, Camden's failing business venture, and the power dynamics that had controlled my entire life. $50 million to start, I said. I want to make some immediate changes to my situation. Dr. Hastings smiled. That sounds like a good beginning. As we finalized the paperwork, I felt a profound shift happening inside me. For 21 years, I had been at the mercy of other people's decisions about my worth and my future. My parents had controlled my finances, dictated my options, and made me feel grateful for whatever scraps of support they chose to provide. Now, in a matter of hours, I had become one of the most powerful people in the room, in the building, in the entire city. But more than the money, what my grandmother had given me was validation. She had seen the same potential in me that I had always felt but been told to minimize. She had witnessed the same unfair treatment that I had endured but been told to accept. When we finished at the law office, Dr. Hastings and I walked out into the San Francisco afternoon sun. The city looked different to me now. Not foreign and intimidating, but full of possibilities I had never imagined. "How do you feel?" she asked as we stood on the sidewalk outside the building where my life had just changed forever. I thought about my parents, probably still celebrating Camden's latest scheme with money they had stolen from me. I thought about the years I had spent believing their narrative about my place in the family hierarchy. I thought about all the times I had doubted myself because the people who were supposed to love me most had failed to see my worth. "I feel free," I said. "For the first time in my life, I feel completely free." Despite having access to unimaginable wealth, I made a decision that surprised even Dr. Hastings. I wasn't going to touch the trust fund money immediately, except for one specific purpose. I wanted to experience what my parents had tried to force me into, the struggle of losing everything, before I revealed the true extent of my power. "Are you sure about this?" Dr. Hastings asked as we sat in our hotel room that evening, overlooking the Golden Gate Bridge. "You have $50 million at your disposal. You could secure your medical school tuition, buy a home, invest in your future. Why put yourself through unnecessary hardship?" "Because I need to understand what they tried to do to me," I explained. "I need to feel the full weight of their betrayal before I respond to it. And honestly, I want to see exactly how they behave when they think they've won." The one exception I made was my medical school tuition. The next morning, I walked into Yale's financial aid office and paid my entire 4-year tuition in full minus $380,000. Using a cashier's check from my new account. The financial aid administrator who processed the payment was stunned. "Miss Caldwell, we weren't expecting this," she said, looking at the check with obvious confusion. "Just last week, we processed the revocation of your scholarship based on your family's changed financial circumstances. Now you're paying in full?" "My circumstances have changed again," I said simply. "I'd also like to make an additional donation to the medical school's research fund. Another $200,000. I walked out of that office knowing that my medical career was secure, regardless of what games my family tried to play. But for everything else, housing, food, personal expenses, I was going to live as if I only had the money I could earn through my own work. I found a tiny studio apartment near the Yale campus for $800 a month. It was smaller than my walk-in closet back home, with thin walls, a kitchen that consisted of a hot plate and a mini fridge, and a bathroom that barely fit a toilet and shower. After 21 years in my parents' mansion, the contrast was jarring, but it was mine. Every inch of that cramped space belonged to me, paid for with money I had earned, in a lease that only had my name on it. For the first time in my life, I had a home that no one could take away from me. To cover my living expenses, I took on every tutoring job I could find. Yale was full of struggling pre-med students who were willing to pay premium rates for help from someone who had already been accepted to medical school. I charged $75 an hour for organic chemistry tutoring, $100 an hour for advanced calculus, and $125 an hour for MCAT preparation. Within 2 weeks, I was booked solid with clients. I also took a part-time job at a high-end restaurant in downtown New Haven, working as a server on weekends. The work was exhausting, 12-hour shifts carrying heavy trays, dealing with demanding customers, cleaning up other people's messes. But it paid well, and it taught me things about the service industry that I had never understood from my privileged perspective. My coworker Maria, a single mother working 2 jobs to support her family, became an unexpected friend and teacher. She showed me how to maximize tips, how to handle difficult customers without losing your dignity, and how to work efficiently even when you're physically and emotionally exhausted. "You work different than most college kids," she observed one particularly busy Saturday night as we cleaned up after the dinner rush. "Most of them act like this job is beneath them. You work like someone who needs every dollar." She wasn't wrong. Even though I had access to more money than she could imagine, I was living as if every dollar mattered, because I wanted to understand what real financial stress felt like. I wanted to experience the anxiety of checking my bank account before making even small purchases, the careful calculation of whether I could afford to order takeout or needed to cook rice and beans again. Meanwhile, back in Willowbrook Heights, my family's celebrations were continuing. Through mutual friends and social media, I kept track of their activities. Camden had officially launched Meal Mystery with great fanfare, using my stolen college fund to rent office space, hire a small team, and begin marketing to potential users. My parents had thrown him a launch party at the country club, complete with catered appetizers and champagne toasts to his entrepreneurial vision. The irony was delicious. They were spending my money to celebrate Camden's business venture while I was working 60-hour weeks between tutoring and restaurant shifts to pay for groceries. But I was learning things that my privileged upbringing had never taught me. I learned how to stretch a grocery budget, how to find free entertainment, how to repair things instead of replacing them. I learned the satisfaction of earning every dollar through my own effort, the pride of building something from nothing, the resilience that comes from knowing you can survive on your own skills and determination. More importantly, I was discovering who I really was when stripped of all the external markers of success that had defined me. Without my parents' mansion, without the safety net of family wealth, without the easy path that privilege had provided, I was finding out what I was actually made of. The answer was steel. I thrived in my tiny apartment. I excelled at my tutoring work, building a reputation as the most effective and reliable tutor on campus. My restaurant colleagues respected my work ethic and my willingness to take on the hardest shifts. My grades remained perfect, despite working more than 40 hours a week outside of classes. During this time, I maintained minimal contact with my family. I would respond to their occasional texts with brief, polite messages. When they asked how I was managing financially, I told them I was figuring it out, the same phrase my mother had used when she dismissed my concerns about losing my college fund. They seemed satisfied with this response, apparently believing that their tough love approach was working. My mother even mentioned to a family friend, who then told Dr. Hastings, who then told me that she was proud of how I was learning to be self-sufficient and not relying on handouts. Handouts. They were calling the college fund they had promised me since birth a handout. 3 months into my new life, I received a call from Camden. Meal Mystery was struggling. Despite his initial confidence and my parents' substantial investment, the app was having exactly the problems I had predicted. Restaurants were dropping out because they couldn't manage the unpredictable demand. Customers were canceling subscriptions after receiving meals they didn't want. The logistics were proving to be a nightmare, and the marketing costs were far higher than anticipated. "Hey, Adrienne," Camden said, his usual cocky confidence replaced by something that sounded almost like desperation. "I was wondering if we could talk. Maybe grab coffee when you're home next?" I hadn't been home since the day I left for San Francisco. "I'm pretty busy with school and work, Camden. What's on your mind?" "Well, the business is going through some growing pains, and I was thinking maybe you could help out. You're good with numbers and problem solving. Maybe you could look at our data and see if you have any suggestions." I almost laughed. After spending months dismissing my intelligence and stealing my future to fund his fantasy, he was now asking for my help when that fantasy started crumbling. "I'm flattered that you think I could help," I said carefully, "but I'm not really qualified to advise on business matters. After all, as Dad pointed out, I'm just going to be another doctor." There was a long pause. "Adrienne, about that whole college fund thing, maybe we handled it wrong. Mom and Dad were just trying to help me get started, and they figured you'd land on your feet anyway." Land on my feet. There was that phrase again. "And I did," I said cheerfully, "just like you all predicted. I'm working multiple jobs, living in a studio apartment, and making it work through my own effort. It's been quite the learning experience." "Right, but maybe now that you've learned that lesson, we could find a way to help you out a little. You know, family should support each other. Family should support each other." Now he was interested in family support. "That's very generous, Camden, but I'm doing fine on my own. I wouldn't want to take away from Meal Mystery's success." After we hung up, I sat in my tiny apartment and smiled. The first cracks were showing in their perfect plan. Camden's business was failing, and now he wanted help from the sister whose intelligence and problem-solving abilities he had dismissed just months earlier. But he had no idea that the struggling pre-med student he was calling for help was actually one of the wealthiest people in the country. And he definitely had no idea what I was planning to do with that information. The breakthrough moment came on a cold Tuesday morning in November, exactly 6 months after my parents had announced their betrayal. I was sitting in my tiny apartment, grading organic chemistry papers for the students I tutored, when I received 3 phone calls that would change everything. The first call was from Dr. Whitmore at Yale Medical School. "Adrienne, I have some extraordinary news. The research paper you submitted on early-stage Alzheimer's detection has been accepted by the New England Journal of Medicine. This is unprecedented for a pre-med student." I nearly dropped the phone. The New England Journal of Medicine was the most prestigious medical publication in the world. Having a paper accepted there as an undergraduate was almost unheard of. This wasn't just an academic achievement. It was the kind of breakthrough that launched entire careers. "But that's not all," Dr. Whitmore continued. "Your research methodology has caught the attention of the Neurological Research Institute in Boston. They're offering you a position as a research fellow, starting immediately. The salary is $150,000 a year, plus benefits, plus funding for your continued research. Adrienne, they're essentially offering you a fast track to becoming one of the leading researchers in the field." My hands were shaking as I hung up the phone. In the span of 5 minutes, my entire academic trajectory had shifted. I wasn't just a pre-med student anymore. I was being recognized as a genuine contributor to medical science. The second call came an hour later, from someone I didn't recognize. "Miss Caldwell, this is James Richardson from Pinnacle Venture Capital. We've been following your research work, and we're interested in discussing a business opportunity with you." I was confused. "I'm sorry, but I think you have the wrong person. I'm a medical student, not an entrepreneur." "Actually, we have exactly the right person. Your Alzheimer's detection methodology has commercial applications that could revolutionize early diagnosis. We'd like to discuss funding a startup around your research. We're prepared to offer initial seed funding of $25 million for a 40% stake in the company." $25 million. For work I had done in my spare time while my family was stealing my college fund and telling me I'd never amount to anything more than another doctor. The third call came that afternoon, just as I was trying to process the magnitude of what was happening. It was Camden, and this time he sounded genuinely panicked. "Adrienne, I need your help. Meal Mystery is failing. We're hemorrhaging money, and we're going to run out of funding within the month. The investors are pulling out. The restaurants are canceling their contracts, and the customers are demanding refunds." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, though I wasn't sorry at all. "But I told you I don't know anything about business." "But you're smart," he said desperately. "You understand systems and problems. Maybe you could look at our data and figure out what's going wrong." "Camden, what's going wrong is that your business model was fundamentally flawed from the beginning. You can't charge people premium prices for random food they might not like. Restaurants can't operate efficiently with unpredictable demand. The logistics of coordinating with dozens of different vendors while maintaining quality control was always going to be impossible." There was silence on the other end of the line. "You knew this would happen, didn't you?" he said quietly. "I tried to explain these problems 6 months ago, but nobody wanted to listen to me because I was just going to be another doctor. Adrienne, please. I know we didn't handle things well before, but I'm desperate. Could you maybe help us out financially, just until we can turn things around?" I almost laughed out loud. "Help you out financially? Camden, I'm working as a waitress to pay rent on a studio apartment. What kind of financial help do you think I can provide? I don't know, maybe you have savings, or you could ask someone for a loan, or—" "Ask someone for a loan?" I interrupted. "Like who? Our parents? The same parents who stole my college fund to give to you? The same parents who emptied my personal savings accounts and sabotaged my scholarship? That wasn't stealing, he protested weakly. They were just reallocating family resources. Reallocating family resources, I repeated. Is that what we're calling theft now? After I hung up on Camden, I sat in my apartment thinking about the surreal nature of my situation. In the span of 6 hours, I had been offered positions and opportunities worth millions of dollars, while my brother was begging the waitress sister he had dismissed for financial help. But the real breakthrough wasn't the external recognition or the business opportunities. It was the moment I realized that everything my family had tried to make me believe about myself was not just wrong, it was the opposite of reality. They had convinced me that I was the safe bet, the one who would be fine no matter what, the one who didn't need support or investment. But what I was actually was the one with real potential, genuine talent, and the ability to create value in the world. Camden, their supposed golden child, was exactly what I had always known he was, a mediocre person with an inflated sense of his own abilities. That evening, I made a decision that would change everything. I called Mr. Beaumont in San Francisco. Adrienne, how wonderful to hear from you. How are you adjusting to your new circumstances? Very well, thank you. Mr. Beaumont, I'm ready to make some moves. I want to access more of the trust fund, and I want to do it in a very specific way. Of course. What did you have in mind? I want to purchase the building where Meal Mystery has their offices. I want to buy it today, without them knowing who the buyer is. Can you arrange that through shell companies or intermediaries? Certainly. That sounds like a very interesting strategy. May I ask what you're planning? I'm planning to give my family a lesson in the difference between real power and the illusion of power. The next morning, I received a call from the venture capital firm. I had decided to take their offer, but with modifications. Mr. Richardson, I'm interested in your proposal, but I'd like to suggest a different structure. Instead of taking your $25 million for 40% of the company, I'd like to provide my own funding. I'll start the company with $50 million in initial capital, maintaining full ownership. There was a long pause. Miss Caldwell, that's a substantial amount of capital. May I ask how a medical student has access to those kinds of resources? Let's just say my financial circumstances have changed recently. I'll have my lawyers send over the documentation. By noon, I had officially founded Thornfield Neurological Research, named after my grandmother, with myself as CEO and majority shareholder. By 2 p.m., through Mr. Beaumont's intermediaries, I had purchased Camden's office building. By 4 p.m., I had hired the 3 best researchers in the field to join my company, offering them salaries that were double what they were making at their current positions. That evening, as I sat in my tiny apartment eating ramen noodles while planning the launch of my multi-million-dollar company, I realized that my parents had actually done me a favor. By betraying me so completely, by forcing me to discover my own strength and resilience, they had inadvertently created the conditions for me to become everything my grandmother knew I could be. The scared, dependent daughter they thought they were manipulating no longer existed. In her place was someone who understood exactly what she was worth and exactly what she was capable of achieving. Tomorrow, I would begin to show them the difference. 6 months later, the medical world was buzzing about Thornfield Neurological Research and its 21-year-old CEO who had seemingly appeared out of nowhere. What my family didn't know was that while they were watching Camden's business empire crumble, I was building something extraordinary. The company's first breakthrough came faster than anyone expected. Our revolutionary Alzheimer's detection system, which could identify the disease 5 years earlier than existing methods, completed its clinical trials with a 97% accuracy rate. The pharmaceutical giant Merck immediately offered us $800 million for exclusive licensing rights to the technology. I turned them down and countered with a partnership deal worth $2.4 billion over 10 years. With Thornfield maintaining ownership of all intellectual property and future developments. They accepted within 48 hours. The announcement made the front page of the Wall Street Journal. 21-year-old medical student creates breakthrough Alzheimer's detection technology. lands multi-billion-dollar deal. The article described me as the youngest person ever to single-handedly negotiate a billion-dollar pharmaceutical partnership. But the real validation came from the scientific community. Harvard Medical School offered me a full professorship with tenure track, despite the fact that I hadn't even completed my undergraduate degree yet. Johns Hopkins invited me to keynote their annual neuroscience conference. The Nobel Committee added my name to their watch list for future consideration. Meanwhile, through my network of informants, former classmates who still lived in Willowbrook Heights, I kept tabs on my family's deteriorating situation. Meal Mystery had officially collapsed 3 weeks after Camden's desperate phone call to me. The business had burned through my entire college fund, plus an additional $300,000 that my parents had borrowed against their house. The investors who had initially been excited about Camden's revolutionary concept were now pursuing legal action for fraud and misrepresentation. It turned out that Camden had lied about several key metrics in his business plan, inflating projected user numbers and understating operational costs. My parents were facing personal liability for some of the loans they had co-signed. The country club membership they had maintained for 15 years was canceled due to unpaid dues. The BMW they had bought Camden for his birthday was repossessed. My mother had taken a job as a real estate agent, her first employment in 20 years, just to help cover their mounting legal fees. But the most delicious irony was yet to come. On a Tuesday morning in March, exactly 1 year after my parents had stolen my future, I received a call from Camden that I had been expecting for weeks. "Adrienne," he said, his voice hollow with defeat, "I need to ask you something, and I know I don't have any right to ask." "I'm listening." "Meal Mystery is being evicted from our office space at the end of the month. The new owner is demanding triple the rent, and we can't afford it. I was wondering if maybe you know someone who could help us negotiate with them, or maybe find us cheaper space somewhere else." I smiled as I looked out the window of my new corner office on the 25th floor of the Thornfield Research Building I had purchased 6 months earlier. "That's tough, Camden. Have you tried contacting the new owner directly?" "We've tried everything. The management company won't even tell us who bought the building. All we know is that it's owned by something called Meridian Holdings, and they're not interested in negotiating." Meridian Holdings was one of several shell companies Mr. Beaumont had established to manage my real estate investments. I owned Camden's office building along with 12 other properties in Connecticut and Massachusetts. "Well, I hope you figure something out," I said. "Maybe this is just another learning experience." The next call came from my mother. 2 days later, she had clearly been crying. "Adrienne, honey, I know we haven't talked much lately, but I wanted you to know that we're going through a difficult time right now." "I'm sorry to hear that, Mom. What's going on?" "Camden's business didn't work out the way we hoped. We're facing some financial challenges, and we might have to sell the house. I was wondering if you might be able to help us out a little bit. Maybe you could take out a student loan for more than you need and lend us the difference." The audacity was breathtaking. After stealing my college fund, my personal savings, and sabotaging my scholarship, she wanted me to go into debt to bail them out of the consequences of their choices. "Mom, I can barely afford my own expenses. I'm living in a studio apartment and working as a waitress to pay rent. How could I possibly help with your mortgage?" "But you're so smart, honey. Surely you could find a way. Maybe you could ask that professor you're always talking about for advice." Dr. Hastings would probably have some very colorful advice about my mother's request, but not the kind my mother was hoping for. "I'll think about it," I said, which was true. I was thinking about it, and it was giving me tremendous satisfaction. The third call came from my father a week later. His approach was different, more aggressive, more demanding. "Adrienne, your mother tells me you're being uncooperative about helping the family during this crisis. I think it's time you learned something about gratitude." "Gratitude? We raised you, clothed you, fed you, paid for your education through high school. The least you could do is show some appreciation by helping us when we need it." Dad, didn't you give my college fund to Camden because I was just going to be another doctor? Didn't you say that doctors are just well-paid employees with no real wealth creation potential? How would another doctor have the resources to solve your problems? Don't be smart with me, young lady. Family helps family. That's how the world works. Interesting. Is that the same family philosophy that guided your decision to steal my money and destroy my scholarship? We didn't steal anything. We made a strategic investment in Camden's future. How did that work out? The silence on the other end was deafening. That same week, Forbes magazine published their annual 30 under 30 inches list in the healthcare category. I was number 1, with a profile that described my journey from unknown medical student to biotech CEO in less than 12 months. The article mentioned that Thornfield Neurological Research was valued at approximately $5.2 billion, making me one of the youngest billionaires in American history. The article also mentioned that I was completely self-made, having started with minimal resources and built my empire through exceptional scientific talent combined with shrewd business acumen. The reporter had tried to interview my family about my success, but apparently they had declined to comment. I suspected they were too busy dealing with their eviction notices and legal problems to talk to reporters. 2 days after the Forbes article was published, I received a text from my high school friend Jessica. "Adrienne, just saw the Forbes thing. Your parents are going crazy. They're telling everyone they always knew you'd be successful, and they're so proud. They're also asking everyone if they know how to contact you because they want to congratulate you personally." I laughed so hard I nearly choked on my coffee. Now they wanted to congratulate me. Now they were proud. Now they had always known I would be successful. But it was too little too late. That evening, I sat in my penthouse apartment. I had finally moved out of the studio and into something that reflected my actual net worth, reading the congratulatory messages from colleagues, mentors, and business partners from around the world. Dr. Hastings had sent champagne. Mr. Beaumont had sent a handwritten note saying my grandmother would be proud. Even some of my old tutoring clients had reached out to congratulate me on my success. But there was nothing from my family. No calls, no texts, no emails. They knew I was now worth billions of dollars, but they still couldn't bring themselves to reach out directly. They were too busy trying to figure out how to benefit from my success without actually acknowledging the years they had spent dismissing and betraying me. Perfect. It was time for the final act of this drama, and I wanted them to come to me. I wanted them to be the ones making the desperate phone calls and sending the pleading messages. I didn't have to wait long. The call I had been waiting for finally came on a Thursday evening in April, exactly 13 months after that fateful dinner conversation that had changed everything. I was in my penthouse office, reviewing clinical trial data for our second breakthrough treatment, when my phone rang with a number I hadn't seen in over a year. It was my father. "Adrienne." His voice was different than I remembered, smaller somehow, lacking the authoritative tone that had once made me shrink into myself. "I hope you have a moment to talk to your old dad." Old dad. As if we had been maintaining regular contact instead of him ignoring my existence for over a year. "Hello, Harrison," I said, deliberately using his first name instead of Dad. "This is unexpected. Adrienne, we've seen the news about your success. Your mother and I wanted to reach out and tell you how proud we are. We always knew you had it in you." I had to set the phone down for a moment to compose myself. The sheer audacity of that statement. "We always knew you had it in you." From the man who had told me I was just going to be another doctor, and that my achievements had a ceiling compared to Camden's entrepreneurial potential. "Did you?" I asked calmly. "Because I distinctly remember you telling me that doctors were just well-paid employees while entrepreneurs were wealth creators. I remember you saying that Camden had vision while I was just following a predetermined path. Now, sweetheart, you know we've always supported your dreams. We may have had different perspectives on the best way forward, but we've always believed in your potential." Different perspectives. That was what he was calling the systematic theft of my money and sabotage of my scholarship. Is that why you gave my college fund to Camden? Because you believed in my potential? That was a complicated situation. We were trying to help the whole family succeed. Camden needed support to get his business off the ground, and we knew you were resourceful enough to find another way. Resourceful enough, I repeated. So you stole my money because you had confidence in my ability to overcome your betrayal? Adrienne, please don't use words like stole. We're family. We made decisions based on what we thought was best for everyone involved. I looked out the window of my penthouse at the city lights below, thinking about the year I had spent working as a waitress while building a billion-dollar company, while my family celebrated their theft with champagne and country club parties. And how did that work out for everyone involved? There was a long pause. When my father spoke again, his voice was quieter, more tentative. Camden's venture didn't succeed the way we hoped. We've learned some difficult lessons about business and about family, but that's in the past now. What matters is that you've done incredibly well for yourself, and we want to be part of your life again. You want to be part of my life again, I said slowly. After 13 months of no contact, after stealing my money, sabotaging my scholarship, and dismissing my dreams, now that I'm worth billions of dollars, you want to be part of my life again. It's not about the money, sweetheart. It's about family. We miss you. Your mother cries about this situation regularly. We want to make things right. What does making things right look like to you? Well, we were hoping we could have dinner next weekend. Maybe we could come to New Haven, see your new life, and talk about moving forward as a family. I almost laughed. They wanted to see my new life, meaning they wanted to see my wealth up close, calculate its value, and figure out how they could benefit from it. That's interesting timing, I said. I heard through mutual friends that you're facing some financial difficulties. Foreclosure proceedings, legal fees, that sort of thing. I'm sure that has nothing to do with your sudden desire to reconnect. Adrienne, I know how this must look, but I swear to you, this isn't about money. We just want our daughter back. Their daughter. The daughter they had ignored for over a year, while she built a medical research empire from nothing. Let me ask you something, Harrison. During the past 13 months, while I was supposedly finding another way and being resourceful, did you ever call to check if I was okay? Did you ever wonder if I had enough money for food or rent? Did you ever consider that maybe, just maybe, you had made a mistake? Silence. I'll take that as a no, I continued, but now that Forbes has published my net worth, suddenly you remember you have a daughter. Adrienne, please. We made mistakes. We handled things poorly. But we're still your parents, and we love you. Do you? I asked quietly. Because love doesn't steal from the people it claims to care about. Love doesn't sabotage someone's educational opportunities to fund a sibling's fantasy. Love doesn't ignore someone for over a year and then suddenly reappear when they become useful. My phone buzzed with another incoming call. It was my mother, probably calling from another phone to tag team me. Harrison, I need to go. I have another call. Please, sweetheart, just think about what I said. Family is family. We want to make amends. I clicked over to my mother's call without responding. Adrienne, honey, thank goodness you answered. Your father is calling you right now, isn't he? He just finished calling, actually. Oh, good. We've been so worried about you. Living all alone, working so hard. We've wanted to reach out so many times, but we weren't sure if you wanted to hear from us. This was fascinating. My father claimed they had always supported me and just made some mistakes. My mother was claiming they had been worried about me, but weren't sure if I wanted contact. They couldn't even coordinate their manipulation strategies. You weren't sure if I wanted to hear from you? I asked. Did it occur to you to find out, by calling? We didn't want to impose. We know you've been busy building your company. Busy building my company, I repeated. The company I started because I had no other choice after you destroyed every other option I had. Sweetheart, we never meant for things to turn out this way. We thought we were making the right decisions at the time. You thought stealing my money was the right decision? We thought we were investing in the family's future. Camden's business seemed so promising. More promising than medical school? More promising than my research? More promising than the daughter who had never failed at anything she seriously attempted? We misjudged the situation. We see that now. Now that Camden's business has collapsed and I'm worth billions, you see it. How convenient. Adrienne, please don't be like this. We're trying to apologize. Are you? Because I haven't heard an actual apology yet. I've heard excuses, justifications, and attempts to minimize what you did, but I haven't heard anyone take responsibility for their actions. Okay, you're right. I'm sorry. We're sorry. We made terrible mistakes, and we hurt you badly. We should never have taken your college fund. We should never have interfered with your scholarship. We should have supported your dreams instead of dismissing them. It was the first real apology I had ever heard from my mother, but it was 13 months too late. And what about Camden? I asked. Is he sorry too, or is he too busy dealing with the legal consequences of his fraudulent business practices? There was a long pause. Camden is struggling right now. The business failure hit him hard, and yes, there are some legal issues he's working through. But he feels terrible about how everything happened. Terrible enough to call me himself? He's embarrassed. He doesn't know what to say. I imagine it would be embarrassing to have to ask your sister for help after spending months telling her she had no business sense and taking her money for a venture that failed exactly the way she predicted it would. Adrienne, we all learned hard lessons this year, but we're still family, and families forgive each other. Do they? I asked. Because for the past year I've been learning about what real family looks like. Dr. Hastings, who flew across the country to support me when I needed help. Mr. Beaumont, who protected my grandmother's trust for over a decade. Maria, my coworker at the restaurant, who shared her lunch with me when I couldn't afford to eat. These people showed me more family loyalty in 1 year than you showed me in 21 years. Those people aren't your real family, aren't they? They're the ones who believed in me. They're the ones who supported me. They're the ones who celebrated my successes and helped me through my struggles. What makes DNA more important than love and support? I could hear my mother crying on the other end of the line. What do you want from us? She asked through her tears. How do we fix this? I looked around my penthouse office, at the awards on the wall, at the contracts worth billions of dollars, at the life I had built despite their best efforts to destroy it. You can't, I said simply. This isn't something that can be fixed with a dinner and an apology. You had 21 years to be real parents, and you chose to be conditional ones instead. You had a daughter who would have moved mountains for your approval, and you chose to invest in a son who couldn't even run a sustainable business. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.